That escalated quickly. Perhaps too quickly. Hey guys, MasakoX here. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that is close to many of us, but at the same time to some of us, it is the bane of our existence and something that we hoped would have just stayed back where it belonged in the early 2000s. I'm talking about, of course, power levels. Okay, calm down guys, calm down, it's not as bad as you think, that was just a joke. We've already talked about power levels specifically in another video, so if you want to check that out, you can check out my channel, links in description, whatever, you know that drill. However, with the advent of power levels and theorizing about what their place is within Dragon Ball Super, there are other mediums that we can actually explore and venture and maybe do some other kind of investigation. They're worth exploring for the purposes of this particular discussion. In reality, our topic for today is more around the grounds of power creep and the power gaps that have arisen. Something that has been very widely discussed within the realms of Dragon Ball Super, and for the right reasons. Just because this particular topic is something that gets some people's blood boiling, doesn't mean that we have to ignore it. It's a perfectly valid topic so long as you take many different viewpoints into consideration first. If you think about it, in some places the story of Super dragged quite a bit, but in terms of powers, it scaled up fast. We started at the beginning with Super Saiyan 3 being the pinnacle of any kind of power that we could comprehend. Then we saw what Beerus could do, and then by the end of 130 episodes, we are now fully acquainted with the art and power and technique that is Ultra Instinct. Going from the likes of Saiyans that we fully understood, to then Pride Troopers, Gods of Destruction, and then Angels, we went from mortals to the highest beings quicker than you could think. Everything suddenly became far more epic than it was. Now don't get me wrong, this whole phenomena didn't just start with Super. I'm sure that if I just stated that Super is the place where power levels existed, I'd have to renege my license to be a Dragon Ball fan. There is always Z. Now remember, a certain creature was able to go toe to toe with divine beings before being taken out by the likes of Goku. Because as we all know, the Supreme Kais and any kind of divine being on the sacred world of the Kais fell and had trouble with the likes of Boo. But hey, thanks to power creep and power scaling, now the likes of a mortal, a Saiyan mortal, could do the jobs of divine beings. The likes of the Supreme Kai Kalu-Kalayed the idea that mortals could now do their dirty work. I mean, of course, we must not forget the fact that Goku was able to finish the job with the handiwork of everybody's favourite champ. Lest we forget. Never forget. Ever. With that whole chestnut of a saga behind us, this whole idea of power scaling is a logical next step of progression, right? I mean, yeah, there are some missteps along the way. Everybody makes mistakes. Especially Super 17. What makes this whole idea about power creep and power scaling much more palatable in the likes of Super is that this isn't just restricted to Saiyans, everybody gets to share in the love. And the whole lack of it in GT probably made it very grating for many people, because for the most part, and I think most of us can agree, it was mainly just about Goku and him getting stronger. And the vast majority of everybody's favourite characters got very little recognition, with Piccolo getting the shortest straw. Going from one of the most pivotal characters in Dragon Ball and being a very handy ally in Dragon Ball Z, in GT, he's now basically become a glorified security guard for the likes of Hell. Yeah, he was just on Earth going, "Yup, I'm just gonna stay. Yeah, this feels right for my character." Everybody likes to compare Super with GT, but what works in Super's favour pretty handily is that thanks to the Tournament of Power, many more characters get to join in the fun. Some of the less godlike characters get some actual screen time. I mean, yes, some of the characters don't get much screen time later on in the arc, and some of their stories don't really go anywhere, but dang it, at least Super tried to give them screen time. For example, our favourite Krill Master. Krillin got a worthwhile mini-arc and quite a lot of attention towards the beginning of the Universe Survival arc. If you actually concentrate, Krillin's arc began with him faltering as the role model of his daughter Marin as well as his wife 18. He was meant to be a strong person and that was falling into question because remember the cappuccino of doubt. Like it or not, Krillin is a nice guy, and to see him struggle in this way is pretty galling for most people that watch Dragon Ball. But at the same time, he is the linchpin in our discussion as to why power creep and power gaps is such a thing in Super. Because there is something that we need to address concerning these guys. How come this guy wouldn't be incinerated by this guy when it comes to training? Because there is a gap. How come he wasn't soundly beaten down by Goku? He wasn't burnt to a crisp or wasted within 10 seconds. The answer? Power scaling. Adjusting one's power is actually pretty commonplace within Dragon Ball Z. If one was in one's control of one's ki, you can actually suppress it and go undetected if you wish to remain anonymous. For example, Krillin and Gohan on Namek trying to go undetected amongst the Frieza forces. There's future Trunks making his grand entrance towards Mecha Frieza and King Cold, thinking he has a power level of 5. There is of course no doubt, and I'm pretty sure I don't have to really talk about it, Farmer with Shotgun, because we all know, honestly, he was holding out on all of us. Jokes aside though, we have to remember the clear and cold fact that Goku is a very well seasoned and experienced fighter. He of all people would know how to adjust his power when it comes to practicing with different people. He wouldn't go all out at once, he tends to build it up, work up to it as it would. Because for the most part, Goku is training with people weaker than him, at least in terms of raw power. In times like these, and thanks to Krillin, he showed us all that you don't have to be stronger to provide a worthwhile fight. It's all about techniques and using what you got to good effect. The training itself was far more technical and gained much more ferocity as Krillin began to dial into his new powers that he discovered in episode 76 onwards. He showed us all the solar flare times 100 and he gained confidence as a result, and his mini arc with his family resolved itself in a very satisfying way. This goes to show that characters like Krillin, the Earthlings, can be utilised effectively and convincingly. The size of one's power doesn't matter, if you know what I mean. It's all about how you use it. Now granted, Krillin's conclusion in Super didn't result in things that we are traditionally used to in terms of power. He didn't win any battles, or at least the big battles, but he did provide a satisfying result given his character. He had a stronger belief in himself and his family, and seeing him and 18 fight in the Tournament of Power together in the anime was priceless. Again, Krillin, 18, Marin, best Dragon Ball family. But going back to what I said earlier, they don't necessarily know what to do in terms of going forward. Once the arc is done for that character, they're kind of done and they're forgotten. Because, yeah, Krillin didn't get a satisfying send-off in the Tournament of Power in the anime. And if you want to actually look at the manga, oh man, that's even worse. I feel really bad for the guy. He had such strong potential, but Toyotaro basically just said, screw him. When it comes to the other Z fighters, Piccolo and Roshi were well utilised within the tournament and had somewhat of a success. And yes, this is as much as we are used to seeing Piccolo bail out Gohan all the time. But granted, there was a neat little bit of subversion when it was Gohan bailing Piccolo out for once. That was a nice little twist. And Roshi himself was a very unexpected return, and it did make people feel very concerned and confused. And this all has to do with power scaling again. But like what we said with Krillin, power isn't everything. It's sometimes all about smarts, which makes you seem stronger than your competitor. His centuries of experience was enough to outsmart some of the lesser opponents within the Tournament of Power, and actually hold his own somewhat impressively with some of the more ferocious characters and combatants. That being said, it does seem very weird for a guy whose power level we know to be in the hundreds, in the very low hundreds at that, then seemingly within maybe a couple of decades being able to take on base form Goku, whose power level was probably in the millions. And again, this is extrapolation from what we already know from the established levels that we got in early Z. It's said that Roshi trained all this time in secret, but you know what? When we found out this revelation, it would have been very cool for Roshi to have a monologue later on, or at least some kind of thing given to the audience at least, showing Roshi train in some kind of montage. That would have been satisfying, but Dragon Ball's not that great at explaining things, so that was to the detriment of the narrative and the believability of that whole thing. Something like showing what Frieza did in terms of his mental training. That was something. At least we got something. With Roshi, we got nothing. We were just expected to believe it. And let's not get started about Ten Shinhan. Oh my days, I feel bad for that guy. Ten Shinhan went from holding his own against Semi-Perfect Cell in a spectacular fashion to barely being able to take on Roshi when slightly buffed up. That is a sudden crawl down, and this guy's supposed to be the leader of a dojo. And it just goes to show that power scaling works both ways. Now, if you want more insight as to why Ten Shinhan has been treated the way he has, check out my video on the subject, link in the description and up top. And trust me, when it comes to Dragon Ball R&R further down the line, I've got something good planned for Tenshinhan, so just you wait. But then again, at least we are seeing characters that are not Saiyans getting the spotlight from time to time. Which brings us on to another unexpected player that made us all scream in wonderment and delight towards the end of the arc. That is, of course, Android 17. I remember loads of people upon first encounter between him and Super Saiyan Blue Goku being really unsatisfied and unhappy about the fact that this character could go toe-to-toe with Super Saiyan Blue, and it didn't seem like Goku was holding back. But in the end, it turns out people ultimately didn't care. It's interesting to see how people's minds change over the course of a few months. And it brought up another topic. How does power scaling work for androids? We all just assumed for the longest time that androids just stayed at the same power that they were when they were made, that they couldn't progress or train in the traditional sense. You know, despite having infinite energy wells to tap into. It kind of worked out in a way, it made them balance. The revelation that they could indeed train and get stronger, as well as keep their infinite energy wells, was a revelation. And actually, in a way, kind of broke Android 17. Powerful with staying power. Yeah, that was a big buff for 17. So the whole point and why I think power scaling makes sense is that it actually relieves us from Saiyan fatigue. Or at least it's Dragon Ball's best answer to relieving us of Saiyan fatigue. The show needs to come up with ways of defining their non-Saiyan cast in much more convincing ways. Yes, you can rely on the likes of Piccolo or Tenshinhan or Roshi to take out the grunts of the Dragon Ball baddies. It kind of seems disingenuous these days that really Goku and Vegeta could be doing the job here, but it just seems that they're paying lip service and giving the screen time to the lesser characters, so that means they're not entirely forgotten. Now let's move on to a particular smash sensation in the Dragon Ball community, which has given loads of characters the time to shine in a convincing manner. That is, of course, Dragon Ball FighterZ. One of the reasons why its storyline has been treasured by the fandom is that it gives everybody the chance to do their bit. Which of the characters get your special attention? You decide. We can have Krillin become something more than just Goku's hype man. We can have Piccolo become a force to be reckoned with once more. And most importantly, we can have Yamcha kick some butt and get his revenge on Nappa, because that cutscene is fantastic. Now the point of this whole discussion is that we have to realise that after the likes of Jiren, it's going to become harder and harder to justify power levels and all that kind of stuff and power scaling. It throws everything into a loop, because where do you go? How do you keep the B team relevant these days without resorting to some shady shenanigans, or Goku kind of making himself weak again by resetting the button and forgetting his divine powers? It would just seem dishonest and wrong to the show. Now what would be cool in a serious conflict to see is some kind of entity or force draining or negating the powers of a Saiyan. It could give the non-Saiyan fighters something to do and do something that is true to themselves. They have to use their smarts. Power scaling wouldn't be a matter. I think it's quite safe to say now that this whole phenomena is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. One way of dealing with all of this would be to pass the torch, as it were, to a new generation of fighters. The likes of Oob, for example. Their power levels, or their power strength and scale, could be like way greater than Goku's was at the beginning of Dragon Ball, but their progression would be far slower than we saw in Z and Super. Thusly, the stakes could be kept much higher than expected and satisfy the audience. Or you could just play it safe. Goku could still take the win, I guess. So what do you guys think? Do you think power scaling could make sense one of these days? Or do you think it's just a simple scourge of the show? Leave a comment below and let's get this discussion going. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Until the next one, be sure to like and subscribe. Catch you later!